On the night before Christmas Eve, a quiet town lit up with joy, except for one house, where a young woman worked with a broken hand, and a calm old mechanic heard something he could no longer ignore. Maple Ridge always looked cheerful this time of year, but on December 23rd, the town felt almost proud of itself. Christmas lights were strung across every porch. Wreaths hung on front doors, some homemade, some bought at the hardware store. The bakery on the corner stayed open late, letting warm ribbons of cinnamon roll out into the cold air. Kids dragged sleds through the snow, laughing so loud their voices bounced off the storefront windows. If someone had driven through, they would have thought this was the kind of town where nothing bad ever happened. But the house at the end of Maple Street didn't match the picture. No lights, no wreath, no music drifting out the windows. Just a weak glow from the kitchen, flickering like it couldn't decide if it wanted to stay alive. Inside, Emily Carter, 23 years old, knelt beside a spilled pot of stew. Her left arm was wrapped in a rough wooden splint held together with worn strips of fabric. The whole limb throbbed with a deep, steady pain she had learned to work around, because stopping wasn't an option. She reached for the pot with her good hand and winced. Behind her, Dalton Reed leaned against the doorframe, holding a half-empty bottle of whiskey. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes red and mean. "You made me look like a fool tonight," he muttered. "The men said the stew tasted like dishwater. They said I can't keep a kitchen straight." Emily didn't answer. She didn't trust her voice. She focused on cleaning the mess, piece by piece. Dalton pushed off the doorframe and stepped closer. "I told you to start earlier," he said. "Power went out? So what? Figure it out. I give you a roof, I give you food. You can at least do your part." Emily tried lifting the pot again. It slipped from her grip and clattered loudly across the floor. Dalton's face tightened. He grabbed her injured arm. "Dalton, please, my hand." He twisted. Pain shot through her shoulder like a bolt of lightning. The splint creaked. Emily's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't scream. She had learned long ago that screaming never helped. Right then, outside the window, the church choir began singing "Joy to the World." Children's voices rose bright and clear, carried by the cold wind. Inside the kitchen, Emily leaned toward the floor, holding her arm, tears stinging but never falling. Dalton released her with a huff, kicked the pot out of his way, and stumbled toward the living room. The television flicked on, filling the house with canned laughter and the cheerful jingle of a Christmas movie, bright voices talking about miracles and love. Emily stayed on the floor a moment longer, breathing slow, steadying herself. Then she started cleaning again. She didn't move quickly. She didn't dare. Outside, snow kept falling, soft and quiet, as if the world was unaware of the storm inside the small kitchen. Across town, Henry Walker closed his garage for the winter night. He flipped the sign to "Closed for Christmas" and shut off the lights one by one. The radio on his workbench hummed an old Christmas tune, warm, slightly fuzzy, familiar. Ranger, his German shepherd, lifted his head from the rug. The dog stood with a calm, steady posture, just like always, ears up, alert but not anxious, eyes following Henry's movements. "Let's take this over to Sam's," Henry said softly, picking up a small toolbox. "Then we'll head home." He slipped into his coat, tucked his gloves into one pocket, and stepped out into the cold. Ranger walked beside him without needing a leash. The dog's stride was confident, grounded, never rushed, matching Henry's pace as naturally as breathing. Maple Ridge glowed under the Christmas lights. Henry didn't rush. He rarely did. He nodded to a few neighbors still out clearing snow. He paused to let two kids run past him, sleds dragging behind them. When he turned onto Maple Street, the sound of the church choir grew clearer. "Joy to the world," the children sang, their voices bright under the hanging lights. Most houses were lit up, but one wasn't. The same house he had walked past for years. The one people avoided talking about unless they lowered their voices. When Henry reached the old wooden fence, Ranger stopped, not abruptly, just a steady halt, ears perked, head angled toward the kitchen window of the dark house. Henry slowed and listened. At first, he only heard the choir, the crunch of snow, the distant buzz of the town preparing for tomorrow. Then he heard something else, a pot hitting the floor, a chair scraping sharply, a man's voice shouting, muffled but harsh, and a sound that wasn't quite a cry, more like someone trying hard not to make one. Henry's breath settled in his chest, heavy but calm. He didn't step closer. He didn't call out. He just stood there a moment, the cold air sharp in his lungs. Ranger looked up at him, expecting nothing, just waiting for direction in the quiet way dogs like him did. "Easy," Henry murmured. "We're just passing through." But he didn't move right away. He knew those sounds, not the specifics, but the shape of them. There were things you didn't forget, no matter how many years had passed. Eventually, he turned to go. Ranger followed, silent except for the soft tap of paws on snow. Sam Hayes was locking up his workshop when Henry arrived. "Right on time," Sam said, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "Told you I'd bring it tonight," Henry replied. They talked briefly, about the parade tomorrow, about the cold, about nothing important. Then Henry handed Sam the box and started back the way he came. As he and Ranger approached the last house again, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. The TV's glow flickered against the curtains, but the kitchen light had gone dim. Henry didn't stop this time. He knew there were things a man couldn't fix in one night, and things he shouldn't try fixing alone. But as he walked past the fence, he looked once at the kitchen window. Just once. Enough to remind himself that he had heard something. And he wasn't the kind of man who ignored things he truly heard. Ranger walked at his side, steady as ever, leaving 2 clean rows of paw prints alongside Henry's footsteps in the snow. Christmas Eve came in on a gray, cold morning, the kind of cold that made coffee taste better and pushed people a little closer together when they talked out on the street. In the kitchen at the end of Maple Street, Emily was up before the sun. Her left arm ached all the way from wrist to shoulder. The splint felt tighter this morning, or maybe the swelling was worse. She wasn't sure. She didn't have time to think about it. The men would be back soon. She cracked eggs one-handed into a big metal bowl, bumping it with her hip to keep it steady. Bacon hissed in the pan, filling the air with a smell that almost made the room feel normal. She moved slowly but steady, learning how to shift weight, how to lean, how to do twice the work with half the hands. The back door creaked. Boots thumped in. "Morning," someone mumbled. "Coffee's there," Emily said, nodding with her chin toward the pot. Her voice was quiet, even. One of the younger workers, tall, maybe in his mid-20s, paused a little longer than the others. His name was Jed. He'd only been working for Dalton a few months. "You okay there, Emily?" he asked, eyes flicking toward her arm. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Her answer came out smoother than she felt. Jed looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. He took his coffee and moved on. Nobody wanted trouble. Everybody needed work. By the time Dalton shuffled into the kitchen, the men were already eating. He barely glanced at Emily. "Stew's better tonight," one of the older men said carefully. "Yeah," another added. "Eggs, too." Dalton grunted like that was his due and sat down at the head of the table. Emily poured him coffee, keeping her body between him and her injured arm as much as she could. He didn't thank her. That was fine. She hadn't expected it. Across town, the diner on Main Street was full by 8. Henry Walker sat at the counter with a mug of black coffee and a plate of pancakes he hadn't asked for, but didn't mind receiving. The owner, Martha, had known him long enough to ignore his, "Oh, just coffee," and slide a plate in front of him anyway. "On the house, Henry," she said. "It's Christmas." He smiled a little. "Appreciate it, Martha." Ranger lay at his feet, tucked in close to the counter stool. The dog's head was up, ears pointed, eyes calmly tracking the movement in the room. Kids passed by to stare at him, but he stayed still, not begging for attention, not shying away either. At the table behind Henry, 2 men in work jackets talked low over their breakfast. "I'm telling you, Dalton's losing it," one said. "Yelled half the night over that stew." "Food's usually good there," the other replied. "Girl cooks just fine. Something was off last night, that's all." "He grabbed her arm," the first man added. "Saw it with my own eyes. She didn't make a sound, but that hand's not right." Henry didn't turn around. He didn't join in. He just took another sip of coffee and let the words sink in. Martha came by with the coffee pot. "You need a warm-up?" she asked. "Sure," Henry said. Then, after a second, he added, "Dalton's still late on your tab?" Martha raised an eyebrow. "You hear something?" she asked. "Just men talking," Henry answered. "You know how it goes." Martha sighed. "Yeah, he's behind. Keeps saying the work will pick up in the spring. Funny thing to say in December." Henry didn't respond. He didn't have to. Martha knew he had heard more than he was saying. People in town were used to that. Henry listened more than he spoke. Folks trusted that about him. Outside, someone taped a flyer for the Christmas Eve service to the diner window. The town was getting ready for the big night. Church, then cocoa, then everyone home to whatever version of Christmas they had. Not all versions were the same. Later that afternoon, Henry stopped by the hardware store. The bell over the door jingled when he walked in, letting in a gust of cold air and a little swirl of snow. He picked up a few things he actually needed, and one or two things he thought he might need someday. It was how he had always shopped. When he stepped back outside, he almost bumped into someone coming in. "Sorry," he said automatically, stepping aside. Emily stood there with a small list clutched in her good hand. Her hair was pulled back, cheeks red from the wind. The splint on her left arm was partly hidden under her coat sleeve, but not enough. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. "Go ahead," Henry said, holding the door for her. "Thank you," she replied, voice soft. Ranger stood a little behind Henry, solid and still, watching her with that calm, focused look he had. No growl, no wagging, just awareness. Emily glanced once at the dog, once more at Henry, then slipped past them into the warmth of the store. Henry didn't say anything else. He didn't ask questions. But the weight of last night's sounds and this morning's whispers settled together in his mind like pieces of a puzzle he didn't quite want to see. He started walking again, Ranger falling into step beside him. As the sky darkened, the town transformed. Lights that had been faint in the afternoon now glowed strong against the early winter night. Families walked toward the church, bundled up in heavy coats, kids bouncing ahead, parents calling them back. Henry didn't always go to the Christmas Eve service, but tonight he planned to stand in the back for a while, just to listen. He liked the music more than the talking. Before heading that way, he and Ranger took the long route, down Maple Street. Most houses were fully lit now, candles flickered in windows. A plastic Santa stood proud on one lawn, light bulbs glowing behind his painted smile. The house at the end of the street was still dark from the front, but the kitchen window on the side showed a small square of light. Through it, from a distance, Henry could see Emily moving around the stove. Her motions were careful, measured, one arm tucked close, the other doing most of the work. No shouting this time, no pots hitting the floor. Just a woman trying to keep a small world running, while the rest of the town prepared for a holiday that didn't quite reach her door. Ranger slowed again at the familiar fence, ears tilting toward the house. Henry rested his fingers lightly on the dog's back for a moment. "We're just watching tonight," he said quietly. Ranger seemed to accept that. He stayed still until Henry took another step. Then he followed, leaving clean paw prints in the snow. Up the street, the first notes of Silent Night drifted out from the church. Henry listened as he walked. He knew, in that quiet way of his, that he wasn't done with whatever was happening at the end of Maple Street. He also knew he couldn't fix what he barely understood. Not yet. For now, he did what he had done most of his life. He walked. He watched. He remembered. And somewhere between the lights of the church and the dark edge of the street, he began to think about what doing the right thing might look like for a man who no longer rushed into anything, but never ignored what he had truly seen. The church on the hill filled up fast on Christmas Eve. Families brushed snow from their coats and slipped into pews, shaking off the cold. Kids fidgeted with paper programs. Older folks greeted each other the way they always did. Same jokes, same nods, same "good to see you." Henry stood near the back wall, hat in his hands. He liked that spot. Close enough to hear, far enough not to be noticed much. Ranger waited outside. The dog lay on the snow by the side steps, where Henry had tied his leash to the railing. His body was relaxed, but his eyes stayed on the door, content just to know where Henry was. The choir started with "O Come, All Ye Faithful." Voices rose, then settled. Candles flickered along the windows. Henry didn't look around much, but he noticed who wasn't there. No Dalton, no Emily. He wasn't surprised. Still, the empty space in his mind where they might have been stayed with him through the whole service. After the final hymn, people moved him out in slow waves. Someone passed out paper cups of hot cocoa by the door. Kids tried not to spill as they scooped marshmallows from a big bowl with plastic spoons. Adults stood in little circles, talking the way people do when they're in no hurry to go home. Henry stepped outside and went straight to Ranger. He untied the leash and scratched the dog behind one ear. "Good boy," he said quietly. "I wasn't gone long." Ranger stood, shook off the snow from his back, and fell in beside him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They were almost off the church steps when Henry heard Dalton's name. "I'm done extending credit," a voice said sharply. Henry recognized it. Jerry, who owned the local feed store. "I told him last week," Jerry went on. No more until he pays the last 2 months. They're still eating at his place, though, right? Another man asked. For now, Jerry replied. But you can't run things on thin air. Can't run 'em on whiskey either. There was a soft ripple of uncomfortable laughter. He's drinking more, a woman added. My sister lives 2 doors down. Says you can hear him yelling late at night. Henry didn't step closer. He didn't act like he was listening. He just slowed his pace by a half step and let the words carry. He's got that girl cooking in there all hours, Jerry said. What's her name again? Emily, the woman answered. Sweet kid, keeps her head down. I asked her once if she needed anything. She said no before I even finished the sentence. Maybe she doesn't want trouble, someone else said. Or maybe she doesn't think anyone can help, the woman replied. Henry kept walking. Ranger matched him step for step. He'd heard enough for one night. Christmas morning came with a pale sun and a sky pressed low over the town. Henry woke early, mostly from habit. The house was quiet. He made coffee in the old machine that sputtered every time, but never quite died. Ranger dozed in his usual spot near the back door, one ear tipped up, listening. Henry's Christmas was simple, a card from a cousin in another state, a pie Martha had sent home with him the day before, a small stack of old photos in a shoebox he looked through once a year and then put away. He didn't feel sorry for himself. He'd made his peace with quiet holidays a long time ago. He poured a second cup of coffee, let the first warmth of the day settle into his hands, and thought about Maple Street. By mid-morning, town life started again. People drove to see relatives. Kids tried out new sleds. The diner opened for a few hours for anyone who doesn't feel like cooking, as Martha had said. Henry and Ranger stepped out into the cold. The air had that stillness it sometimes got on holidays, like the world was catching its breath. They walked with no real destination at first, past the post office, past the closed school, down the block where kids had built a lopsided snowman with one glove for a hat. Finally, their path turned, almost on its own, toward Maple Street. Dalton's truck was gone. Henry noticed it right away when he and Ranger reached the old fence. The driveway was half covered in snow, tire tracks leading out toward the main road. The front of the house looked the same, no lights, no wreath. But smoke rose from the chimney. Somebody was home. Ranger paused at the fence again. He didn't whine or growl. He just stopped, ears pointed toward the side of the house, like he was listening for something specific. Henry stood there a moment. From inside, he could pick out the faint clatter of dishes, the low hum of the refrigerator, the soft scrape of a chair being moved. No shouting, no crashing, no TV blaring loud enough to shake the windows. He took that in, then moved on. Come on, boy, he said. They didn't get far before a car rolled slowly down Maple and stopped near the house behind them. Henry turned just enough to see Martha step out, balancing a foil-covered dish with oven mitts. He waited on the sidewalk while she walked up to the door of Emily's house. From where he stood, he couldn't hear the words, but he could see the scene clear enough. Martha knocking, Emily opening the door halfway, surprise on her face. Martha spoke. Emily shook her head at first. Martha spoke again, a little more firmly this time, and held out the dish. After a moment, Emily opened the door wider and took it, her good hand steady, her injured arm held close. She gave a small, careful smile. Martha touched her shoulder, just once, then turned and headed back to her car. On her way down the steps, she spotted Henry. "Morning, Henry," she called. "Morning," he answered. "Brought her a ham," Martha said, nodding back toward the house. "Figured nobody should have an empty table on Christmas, no matter how stubborn the man of the house is." "Truck's gone," Henry observed. "Yeah," she said. "Left early. My guess, he'll be at Ted's bar till closing." She hesitated. "Girl's in there alone." Henry nodded slightly. He didn't say what he was thinking, that sometimes alone was the safest version of Christmas a person could have. "You headed to the diner later?" Martha asked. "Maybe," he replied. "See how the day goes." "All right. You two take care," she said, giving Ranger a fond look before driving off. Henry and Ranger watched her go, then looked back toward the house. Through the thin curtain of the kitchen window, they could see a bit of movement. Emily setting the dish on the counter, unwrapping the foil, turning on the stove. Just a regular, small act on a cold day. But it was something. "Come on," Henry said again, turning away at last. Ranger followed, paws pressing neat prints into the snow. As they walked, Henry thought about everything he'd heard in the last 2 days. The yelling, the whispers, the talk of unpaid tabs, the way Emily moved like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. None of it gave him a full picture, but it gave him enough to know this wasn't just a bad night or a short temper. Something was wrong at the end of Maple Street, and Henry Walker was not the kind of man who rushed in, but he also wasn't the kind who forgot. The day after Christmas didn't feel much like a holiday. Snow had turned to a thin, dirty slush along the streets. The bright shine of Christmas Eve was already fading, leaving behind tired decorations and people going back to their usual worries. At the end of Maple Street, those worries had never really gone away. Dalton's truck was back in the driveway by late afternoon. Emily heard it before she saw it, the rough rattle of the engine, the slam of the door, the heavy steps on the porch. Her whole body tensed without meaning to. She was standing at the counter, cutting potatoes one-handed. The ham Martha had brought filled the kitchen with a comforting smell, but it didn't comfort her much. She'd saved some of it, stretched it with whatever else they had. Dalton liked meat. Dalton liked feeling like he had more than other men. The back door swung open. "Where were you yesterday?" he snapped, even before he'd fully stepped in. "I come back and you're not here." "I was here," Emily said quietly. "All day." "I knocked," he said. No answer. "I was in the basement getting wood," she replied. "Didn't hear you." He dropped a paper bag on the table. It rattled with the sound of bottles. "Town's talking, you know," he muttered, poking at the ham on the stove. "They always talk. That Martha woman, she thinks she's better than everybody. Thinks she can just show up and give you food like we're some charity case." Emily didn't answer. She focused on the potatoes. "You take anything from her, you tell me first," Dalton went on. "I don't like people thinking they can step into my house whenever they want." Emily kept her eyes on the knife. "It was just a ham," she said. "I didn't ask." "That's not the point." His voice rose. "People see her coming here. They start thinking they know what happens in my house. They start thinking they can judge." He grabbed a plate and began piling food on it, more than he could probably finish. He ate standing up, shoveling it in, chewing hard. "Men at the lot were laughing," he said with his mouth full. "Said I got the whole town feeding my girl. Said maybe I can't provide like I say I can." He slammed his fork down, the sound sharp against the plate. "You know what that looks like, huh?" he demanded. Emily swallowed. "It looks like people trying to be kind," she said very quietly. Dalton stared at her. Something in his face went from anger to something darker. "You been talking to them?" he asked. "Telling them things about me?" "No," she said quickly. "No, I haven't told anyone anything." "You sure?" He stepped closer. "Because all of a sudden everyone's got opinions. Everyone's watching." His breath carried the sour smell of whiskey and something bitter under it. "I haven't said anything," Emily repeated. Her voice trembled a little, he noticed. "Don't you lie to me," he said. "I'm not—" His hand shot out, faster than she was ready for. He didn't grab her arm this time. He grabbed the knife. For a second, Emily thought she didn't even know what she thought. He turned away from her, though, and slammed the blade down on the cutting board. Potatoes scattered. "You think food fixes everything," he said. "All these people with their pies and hams and smiles. They don't know you. They don't know me." He swept his arm across the counter. The plate of ham, the bowl of potatoes, a jar of pickles, everything hit the floor. The crash was loud in the small room. Glass shattered. Emily flinched, but didn't move. Dalton wasn't done. He reached for the shelf above the stove, where she kept a small tin box tucked in the corner. Her hands twitched. "Don't," she said, the word ripping out of her before she could stop it. "Please, that's my mother's." He pulled the tin down anyway. "What's so special about this?" he asked. "It's just recipes," Emily said, taking a half step forward. "They're old, that's all." He popped the lid open. Inside were folded index cards, edges browned, some with faint smudges of flour still on them. There was a little photo, too. Two people in front of a tiny house, smiling at something just off camera. Dalton flipped through the cards, eyes narrowing. "Magic papers," he said, mocking her. "These the reason people like your food so much, huh?" "They were my mom's," Emily said. "They're all I have left." "Then maybe you should have taken better care of them," he said. He tossed the cards toward the stove. One or two fell into the burner, where a small blue flame was still licking at the bottom of a pot. The edges of the paper curled, then caught. For a heartbeat, Emily didn't move. Then she lurched forward, trying to reach them with her good hand. Dalton stepped in her way. "Let it go," he said. The fire climbed quickly across the thin paper, words written in careful handwriting: flour, butter, bake until golden, blackened and disappeared. Emily watched, helpless, as heat bent the cards into ash. Something went quiet inside her, not peaceful, just empty. When the last corner burned out, Dalton turned away like he'd just taken care of a chore. "Clean this place up," he said, nodding at the floor. "Men'll be back early tomorrow. They're expecting breakfast." He walked out of the kitchen, down the hall, and into the living room. The TV came on a moment later, too loud for a small house. Emily sank to the floor. She didn't cry. It felt like the part of her that cried had gone up with the smoke. She picked up broken glass carefully, one piece at a time, and dropped it into a paper bag. Her left arm throbbed with every movement, but she kept going until the floor was mostly clear. When she finally sat back on her heels, the kitchen felt different. Not just messy, not just broken. It felt like someone else's place now. Up the street, the wind had picked up. Henry Walker had been on his way home from the diner, a warm takeout container in one hand for later, Ranger trotting beside him. The air had that restless feel it sometimes got when the weather couldn't decide whether to snow again. As they turned onto Maple, a shout carried down the block. A crash followed, then another. Ranger slowed without being told. Henry stopped near the familiar fence. From inside the house at the end of the street came the muffled noise of breaking dishes, a man's voice raised in anger, and then a long stretch of nothing. Not silence exactly, just the kind of stillness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Henry stared at the side window. The curtains were drawn tight. Light flickered behind them, then steadied. He didn't go closer. His hand tightened a little around the paper bag. Ranger stood at his side, body lined up with Henry's leg, ears forward but not shaking, like he was ready if needed but waiting for Henry's lead. "This isn't our night," Henry said quietly. He believed in doing the right thing. He also believed in not charging into situations blind, especially when whiskey and anger were involved. But as he walked away, he counted each step, aware of every sound. His mind held onto the crash of breaking glass, the rhythm of that man's voice, the long pause after it all. It filed those sounds somewhere he knew he wouldn't lose them. Ranger left a steady trail of paw prints behind them, side by side with Henry's boots, leading away from Maple Street, for now. 2 days after Christmas, Maple Ridge felt like it had a quiet headache. The lights were still up, but some of the bulbs had gone out. The snow at the side of the roads was gray instead of white. People were back to work, but a little slower, like they hadn't quite shaken off the holiday. Henry Walker rolled up the garage door just after 8. Cold air slid in over the concrete floor. He flipped on the lights, set a fresh pot of coffee going, and listened to the familiar sounds of his own space. The click of the heater, the small rattle of tools settling in their drawers. Ranger paced the perimeter like he always did, then found his usual spot near the workbench and lay down. From there, he could see both the front door and Henry's hands. That seemed to be all he needed. Around mid-morning, a pickup rumbled into the lot. It was Jerry's truck, the same Jerry who owned the feed store. He climbed out, stomped snow off his boots, and pushed open the garage door. "Morning, Henry," he said. "She's making a noise again." "They do that," Henry replied. "Pull her in." They went through the usual motions, hood up, engine checked, a few questions about the sound. As Henry worked, Jerry leaned against the fender, arms folded. "You been down Maple much lately?" Jerry asked. "Here and there," Henry said. Jerry snorted. "Dalton's running that place into the ground. Still owes me for feed from October. Keeps saying the crew's gonna pick up again in spring. I told him last time, I don't take promises as payment." Henry tightened a bolt, wiped his hand on a rag. "How much is he into you for?" he asked, like it was just shop talk. "More than I like," Jerry said. "Not enough to sue over. Enough to be mad about." He watched Henry for a second. "I'll tell you this, though," Jerry added. "If somebody with a steadier head than mine wanted to take that note off my hands, I'd sleep better at night." Henry didn't look up. "You thinking of selling it?" "Thinking of not looking at his name every time I open my ledger," Jerry said. "If I could trade that stack of IOUs for even part of what he owes, I'd do it. Let some other poor soul deal with him." Henry just nodded. "She'll need a new belt soon," he said, nodding toward the engine, "but I can keep her going for now." Jerry seemed to understand that the conversation had gone as far as it was going to, for the moment. Still, a small idea had been said out loud, and neither of them quite put it back. The diner was slow that afternoon. The rush of holiday travelers had passed through. The regulars were back to their usual spots. Martha refilled coffee without needing to ask. Henry sat at the counter again, Ranger at his feet. The radio in the corner played country songs about heartbreak and highways, with the occasional Christmas tune still slipping in between. At the far end of the counter, Sam Hayes from the woodshop flipped through a thin stack of papers. He sighed, shook his head, and took a long drink of coffee. "Tough week?" Martha asked him, wiping a plate. "Just looking at my receivables," Sam said. "Some of them are fine. Some of them I ought to frame and hang on the wall, since I'll never see the money." Martha half smiled. "Let me guess. One of those names starts with D and ends with Alton." Sam snorted. "You read minds now?" Henry didn't join in, but Martha poured him another cup and spoke a little louder, like she knew he was listening. "He owe you two, Sam?" she asked. "2 doors, 3 windows, and a rush repair job from last month," Sam said. "If I added it up, I'd just get mad again." "Why let him run a tab that long?" Martha asked. "He had men working," Sam said with a shrug. "Said if he could keep them, they'd all get paid. Figured I'd give him the benefit of the doubt." He let the papers drop onto the counter. "Benefit's all gone now." Martha looked at Henry. "What about you?" she asked softly. "He owe you anything?" Henry took a slow sip of coffee. "Not anymore," he said. "Stopped fixing his truck on credit a while back." "Wish the rest of us had your timing," Sam said. The door opened just then, letting in a gust of cold air, and a man Henry didn't know well, a traveling salesman of some kind, the kind who passed through town a few times a year with parts and supplies. He shook off his coat and took a seat near Sam, dropping a briefcase by his feet. "Afternoon," he said to the room in general. "Back again so soon, Tom?" Martha asked, pouring him coffee. "Yeah," Tom replied. "Figured I'd see if anyone's ready to settle some accounts before the year's over." He gave a short laugh. "Couple of your folks are starting to make me nervous." "Let me guess," Sam said. "One of them starts with—" Tom held up a hand. "Can't discuss specifics. You know that." He took a long drink of coffee, then added, "But I will say this. There's a certain man at the end of Maple who's one good shove away from losing everything he's got." Sam whistled low. Martha glanced at Henry again. He kept his eyes on his cup, but she could see he was listening. "What happens," Henry asked quietly, "if all those little debts end up in one place?" Tom looked at him, considering the question. "Well," Tom said slowly, "depends how it's done. If somebody buys up the notes, or they get assigned over, and they're all in default, that person has options." "What kind of options?" Sam asked. Tom shrugged. "Legal ones. You can put pressure on a man who's in debt up to his eyeballs. Take his land if it comes to that, or his equipment. Depends what's written down." He set the cup down. "Why? You interested in becoming a landlord, Mr. Walker?" Henry gave a small, almost amused smile. "Just asking," he said. Tom chuckled. "You're the last man I'd picture wanting to push somebody off their property," he said. "But if the town wants it out from under a bad bet, I wouldn't blame folks for passing the headache to someone who can handle it." Martha topped off Henry's coffee without a word. Nobody said Dalton out loud again. They didn't have to. That evening, Henry sat at his kitchen table with his reading glasses on and a stack of papers in front of him. Jerry's handwritten IOU from the feed store, a crumpled note Sam had quietly slid into his hand at the diner. "Just in case you figure something out," he'd said. A photocopy Tom had left, with certain names blacked out but numbers circled. Henry wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a banker, he was a mechanic who had spent most of his life under the hood of a car. But he could read, and he understood something simple. One man owing a little bit to everybody was noisy and messy. One man owing a lot to one person was different. Ranger lay on the rug nearby, head on his paws, watching Henry's slow movements with those steady eyes. Every now and then, the dog's ears twitched at a sound from outside. A car passing, a branch scratching the window, but he always settled again. Henry set one paper aside, then another. He wasn't out for revenge. He wasn't looking to own anybody's home. That wasn't who he was. But Emily's face in the hardware store, and the sound of glass shattering in that kitchen, and the way the town talked about Dalton like a storm, they were all trying to stand in the path of... All of it sat heavy on his mind. He reached for a pen and, on a blank sheet of paper, wrote down a few names in a neat list. Jerry, Feed Sam, Woodwork, Martha, Diner tab. Tom, note holder. He looked at the list for a long time. Ranger shifted, as if even he could feel something turning. Henry took a breath. If there was going to be a way to stop the storm at the end of Maple Street, it wasn't going to be by yelling louder than Dalton. It might be by showing up with more than just concern. It might be by holding, in one quiet pair of hands, all the weight that man had tried so hard to ignore. For the first time, Henry let himself picture it, standing on Dalton's porch, not as a neighbor, but as the man who controlled every debt that kept Dalton upright. He didn't know yet if he would do it, but he knew he could. And that knowledge, heavy and clear, was the kind that didn't go away. The morning after Henry made his list, the cold came back sharper. The sky was pale, the kind of pale that made the whole town look like it hadn't fully woken up yet. Frost stretched across windshields and windows. Even the Christmas lights looked tired. Henry stepped outside with Ranger at his heel. He locked the garage behind him and walked toward Main Street, not fast, not slow, just the steady pace he always kept. He didn't bring the list with him. He didn't need to. Every name was memorized. Ranger kept close, calm, and silent, boots and paws leaving twin marks on the frozen ground. Today wasn't a day for fixing trucks. Today was for conversations. The feed store was first. The bell over the door rang softly as Henry entered, and warm air rushed out to meet him. The place smelled of hay, grain, and old wood, always had. Jerry looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, Henry," he said. "Need something?" "Yes," Henry answered. "A few minutes of your time." Jerry leaned an elbow on the counter. "Shoot." Henry didn't waste words. "You said the other day, if someone took that note off your hands, you'd sleep easier." Jerry blinked, surprised. Then he let out a low whistle. "Well," he said, "didn't think you'd be the one asking." Henry didn't defend himself. He just stood there, steady as a fence post. "I'm not looking to squeeze him," Henry said. "Just looking to take the weight off folks who don't deserve carrying it." Jerry's expression softened a little. "Can't argue with that," he said. "Truth is, I'm tired of seeing his name in my books. Tired of wondering if I'll ever see a penny." He pulled open a drawer and took out a single folded page. "This is it." Henry didn't touch it yet. "How much?" he asked. "Half," Jerry replied. "You give me half of what he owes, and the paper's yours. I'll cut my losses." Henry nodded once. "Fair." He took out his checkbook, an old one with creases on the cover, and wrote the amount carefully. Jerry handed over the note, relieved. "That's it?" Jerry asked. "No lectures, no questions?" "No," Henry said. "No need." He turned to leave, Ranger following. Jerry called after him. "Henry, you planning to fix what's going on down there on Maple?" Henry paused but didn't turn around. "I'm planning not to ignore it," he said. Then he walked out, the bell chiming behind him. The woodshop was next. Sawdust clung to the air, catching the sunlight that spilled through the front windows. Sam Hayes stood beside a half-finished table, sanding the edge smooth. He looked up when Henry stepped inside. "Didn't expect to see you today," Sam said. "Wanted to ask about your note," Henry replied. Sam wiped his hands on his apron. "You serious? You want to deal with Dalton's nonsense instead of me?" Henry gave a small shrug. "Better I take it than you keep chasing it." Sam chuckled. "Ain't that the truth?" He went to a drawer in the back, rummaged, and returned with 3 small papers clipped together. "Windows, doors, repair work, all itemized," Sam said. "He owes me more than he'll admit, but less than he thinks." "How much to settle?" Henry asked. Sam didn't think long. "Give me 1/3, he said. "He paid nothing the last 2 months. Something's better than nothing." Henry wrote another check, simple and calm. Sam handed the papers over. "Henry," Sam said quietly, "you're not doing this to hurt the man, right?" "No," Henry said. "I'm doing it to help someone else." Sam didn't need to ask who. The diner was warm, louder than the other places. Martha glanced up when Henry came in, and she read the look on his face before he even spoke. "Oh, Henry," she sighed, "you don't have to do this for me." "I know," Henry said, "but I'm doing it anyway." She reached under the counter and pulled out a small tab, folded and wrinkled. "It's not a lot," she said. "Maybe $50 altogether." Henry shook his head. "It's not the amount. It's the principle." She put the tab in his hand. "You're a good man," she said. "I try to be," Henry answered. Ranger lay down by the door, waiting. Tom, the salesman, walked in right and then carrying his briefcase. He spotted Henry immediately. "Well, well," Tom said. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon. "I've been thinking," Henry said, "about that note you mentioned." Tom tapped at the case lightly. "Dalton's? It's messy. I've handled messy before." Tom studied him, really studied him. "You want it," he said finally. "You want all of it." Henry didn't deny it. "I want it off the town," he said, "and I want to use it responsibly." "Responsible's not a word most folks use for debt," Tom said, half smiling. Henry didn't smile back, but Tom nodded, understanding. "All right," he said, "let's step outside." They talked beside the diner, in the cold, Ranger sitting like a statue beside Henry. Tom explained the numbers, the overdue amounts, Dalton's missed payments, the legal language, what holding that note meant, what power it carried. Henry listened without interrupting, hands in his coat pockets, breath misting in front of him. When Tom finished, Henry said, "What's the price?" Tom named a number. Henry didn't flinch. He reached into his coat, unfolded a check he had already filled out, because he had known deep down how this would go. Tom stared at the check, impressed. "You're sure?" he asked. "Yes," Henry said. Tom handed over the folder. "Well," Tom said, "looks like you own one angry man's future." "No," Henry answered, "I own his debt. What he does after that is on him." Tom gave one last nod, quiet and respectful. "You're not doing this for yourself," he said. "No," Henry replied. "For the girl?" Tom asked. Henry looked down the street toward Maple. "For the town," he said. Then after a breath, "and for someone who deserves better than what she's getting." Ranger leaned lightly against Henry's leg, sensing the shift. Something had changed, not loud or dramatic, but deeply, quietly. Henry Walker, retired mechanic, small-town neighbor, man who rarely spoke more than he needed to, now held the entire weight of Dalton Reed's unpaid life. That night, Henry spread everything across his kitchen table, the IOUs, the receipts, the main overdue credit note, all now in his possession. Ranger sat on the rug, perfectly still. Henry read every page, every number, every signature. He wasn't angry. He wasn't excited. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was preparing, because sooner or later, Dalton Reed would learn what happens when the whole town's patience runs out. And it all ends up in the hands of the calmest man in town. Dalton Reed woke up late, head pounding, the house cold and unfriendly. He shuffled into the kitchen, expecting coffee, expecting someone to have put the world back together while he slept. It was still a mess. Broken glass underfoot, shelves half-hanging, Emily nowhere in sight. "Useless," he muttered, grabbing a bottle from the counter. Outside, the snow had warmed enough to melt and then freeze again. The yard looked slick and neglected. A notice from the county sat on the porch. He stepped over it without reading. Then he saw the pickup truck pulling into the driveway. Dalton straightened. For a second, confidence returned. Probably Jerry with feed. Or Sam with the windows, someone who owed him work. The door opened, but it wasn't Jerry. It wasn't Sam. It was Ray Morales, the mail carrier, slow, steady, retired Navy, a man who didn't scare easily. "Mornin'," Ray said. "Got paperwork for you." Dalton rolled his eyes. "Leave it on the porch." "Needs your signature," Ray replied. Dalton snatched the folder, scribbled his name, and slammed the door. He didn't open it until Ray's truck pulled away. Inside were letters, official ones. He tore the first envelope open, then the second, then the third. By the time he reached the fourth, his face had gone pale. Assignment of debt, notice of transfer delinquency statement, all with the same new creditor's name printed neatly at the bottom, Henry Walker. Dalton stared at it, stunned. The old mechanic? The quiet man with the dog? It made no sense. He grabbed his coat and stormed outside, slipping on the ice but catching himself. Snow crunched loudly under his boots. He was breathing hard before he even reached the truck. "What's that man planning?" he muttered. "What's he trying to pull?" He drove toward town, wheels spinning on the icy road. At the garage, Henry was tightening a bolt on a Ford when Dalton marched in without knocking. The door slammed hard enough for Ranger to lift his head. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just watched, alert and steady, ears forward. Henry looked up slowly. "Morning," he said. "What the hell is this?" Dalton shoved the paperwork toward him. "Every note, every bill, you—" Henry wiped his hands with a cloth. "I bought what folks were ready to let go of," he said. "Nothing more. You think you can own me, control me?" Dalton's voice cracked. "No," Henry replied calmly. "Just holding you to what you promised. Dalton's breathing grew heavier. You want money? I'll pay you when the crew comes back. There is no crew, Henry said. Hasn't been for weeks. Everybody knows that, but you. Dalton swore under his breath. Henry set the wrench down, slow and deliberate, never threatening, just steady. You've got 30 days, he said. Same terms you had with everyone else. I didn't change a word. That girl, Dalton started, but he stopped. Himself too late. Henry's eyes sharpened for the first time. Dalton swallowed. You leave her out of this, he said, voice struggling between anger and panic. I am, Henry replied, but you should have done the same. Dalton's jaw clenched. His hands balled into fists. For a moment he looked ready to swing. Ranger stood, not aggressive, not even tense, just standing, like a line drawn quietly across the floor. Dalton stepped back without realizing why. Henry didn't move an inch. This isn't personal, Henry said. You owed people. They chose to stop waiting. I stepped in, that's all. That's all, Dalton shouted. You're ruining me. You did that yourself, Henry said, not unkindly. I'm just the man holding the paperwork. Dalton's face twisted with something ugly. You think the town's on your side? He said. Think they trust you more than me? Henry didn't answer. He didn't have to. Dalton suddenly turned, storming out, nearly slipping again on the ice outside. Henry watched him go, then looked down at Ranger. Let's finish this, he said softly, returning to the Ford. Ranger lay back down, calm again. Meanwhile, down Maple Street, Emily had spent the morning washing dishes in cold water. Her injured hand throbbed, but she worked one-handed, careful and quiet. Her mother's last words, "You deserve gentleness," echoed somewhere deep. She tried not to hear them. When she stepped outside to dump the water, she saw Dalton's truck fishtailing up the road, snow spraying behind it like anger leaving a trail. Her stomach tightened. Dalton parked crooked and stomped toward the house, red-faced. He burst through the door. "Pack your things," he snapped. Emily froze. Why? Because the whole damn town is turning on me. Jerry, Sam, even that old mechanic, he's trying to take everything. So, we're leaving. Emily's heart hammered. You mean running? Dalton glared. I mean we're starting over, somewhere nobody sticks their nose in my business. She held the counter for balance. My hand, she said softly. Where would we go? Don't question me, Dalton barked. Emily stayed silent, but something had shifted inside her, quiet, like snow sliding off a roof. Not fear, not hope, clarity. If Dalton was running, it meant things were truly falling apart, which meant someone, somewhere, had stood up to him. And she knew, without knowing how, who that person likely was. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Henry walked home with Ranger beside him, their shadows long across the snow. He didn't rush. He never rushed. But he could feel the town watching him now, not with fear, not with excitement, but relief. As if someone had finally picked up a heavy load they had all been quietly carrying. Mr. Thompson from the post office tipped his hat. Martha from the diner handed him a small box of leftover cookies. Even Sam waved. From his truck. Small-to-town gratitude wasn't loud. It just showed up in simple gestures. Henry stopped at Maple Street, just for a moment, looked toward the dark house at the end. A single light flickered inside. Not enough to see faces, but enough to know life was still happening in there. Hard, uneven life. Ranger leaned against his leg, warm and steady. Henry took a slow breath. Tomorrow, conversations would get harder. Dalton would get meaner. The town would get louder. But tonight, Henry simply turned toward home. The wind picked up. Snow drifted across the path. And for the first time since Christmas, Maple Ridge felt like something was finally about to change. Dalton didn't sleep that night. He paced the house like a man trapped inside his own shadow. Cabinets opened and slammed shut. Boots stomped from one room to the next. At times he stopped completely, breathing hard, hands shaking. Not from fear, but from a life finally catching up to him. Emily stayed in the kitchen, sitting at the table, with her injured hand in her lap. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she just listened. Near midnight, Dalton muttered, "We're leaving at sunrise. You hear me? Pack whatever you can carry." Emily didn't answer, because deep inside, quiet but certain, she knew they were not going anywhere. Sunrise came cold and gray. Snow drifted across the porch in thin sheets, moving like smoke over the frozen boards. Dalton stormed outside to start the truck, but the engine coughed twice and died. He kicked the tire, swore, opened the hood, and stared at it as if the machine owed him something. Inside the house, Emily stood at the window. For the first time, she realized something simple. The world outside was bigger than the man yelling in the driveway. The town kept moving without him. The snow kept falling. People kept living. Her breath left her chest in a slow, shaking exhale. Then she heard footsteps. Not Dalton's. Steady, unhurried. She stepped back from the window as Henry Walker came up the path, Ranger at his side. The dog's ears were up, not in warning, just paying attention, grounded and calm. Henry stopped at the edge of the porch, not stepping onto it. He kept his hands in his coat pockets. His presence was quiet, but it filled the space in a way Dalton never could. Dalton's head snapped up. "You!" he growled. "What are you doing here?" Henry glanced once at the truck, then at Dalton. "Just came to talk," he said. Dalton laughed, sharp, humorless. "You think you can take my house, my land? This is mine." Henry shook his head. "Debt isn't ownership, but it has consequences." Dalton threw the wrench he was holding. It hit the snow and disappeared into the drift. "You ruined me," he shouted. Henry didn't step back. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't match Dalton's anger. "No," Henry said softly. "You walked yourself to this place. I'm just the one telling you where the road ends." Dalton's face twisted, but the fight drained from him all at once. He leaned on the truck, shoulders shaking, not from cold, but from a man realizing he had run out of places to hide. "You don't know what it's like," Dalton muttered. "Trying to keep a crew together, trying to survive." Henry looked at him with a kind of tired compassion. "Most folks here know what survival feels like," he said. "They just don't hurt others on their way through it." Dalton didn't answer. Inside the house, Emily pressed her fingers to her lips. She had never seen anyone speak to Dalton this way. Calm, firm, without fear. Henry waited until Dalton finally looked up. "I'm giving you a choice," Henry said. "You can fight everyone in this town, lose everything, and walk away angry. Or you can hand over the property, settle the debt, and leave with some dignity intact." Dalton stared at him, breathing hard. "What if I say no?" Henry nodded toward Ranger. Not as a threat, just as a reminder. "You won't," he said simply. Dalton looked at the dog, at Henry, at the empty road, at the broken life behind him. And something inside him cracked, not loudly, but like old wood finally giving under pressure. He let the hood drop. "Fine," he whispered. "Take it. Take all of it." Henry gave a single nod. "I'll bring the paperwork this afternoon. You'll sign it, and the sheriff will witness." Dalton didn't argue. He climbed into the truck, turned the key again, and this time the engine caught. He didn't look back as he drove down the road, snow kicking up behind him. Inside the house, Emily let out a breath she'd held for years. That afternoon, when Henry returned with the sheriff, the house felt different, quieter, like a place that had stopped bracing for impact. Emily stood near the doorway, hands clasped in front of her. Henry never stepped inside. "Dalton left a while ago," she said softly. Henry nodded. "Sheriff will handle the rest." Emily looked at her wrapped hand, then back at him. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Henry replied. "Just take your time. Heal. Rest." She swallowed hard. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. "I heard what you said to him," she said. No one ever stood between him and me before." Henry shook his head gently. "I didn't stand between," he said. "I just held the door open so you could walk through." Emily's breath caught, small and fragile. Ranger stepped forward, tail still, posture gentle, and Emily smiled faintly. Maybe the first real smile in months. Henry tipped his hat. "If you need anything," he said, "the town knows where to find me." The sheriff approached, ready to go inside and begin the legal work. Henry turned to leave, but Emily called out once more. "Henry!" He paused. "You didn't do this for the town, did you?" Henry looked down the snowy road where Dalton had disappeared hours earlier. "No," he said quietly, "not only for the town." Then he walked away with Ranger at his side, their footprints weaving together in the snow, two steady trails leading toward a future that finally made room for peace. That evening, Maple Ridge glowed again. Lights flickered warm on the houses. Children played in the street. The diner hummed with quiet conversation. Henry sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, Ranger lying at his feet. He didn't think about debt, or ownership, or the mess someone else had left behind. He thought about the sound of Emily's voice when she said thank you, without saying the words. He thought about the quiet courage it took for a person to step through a door that had been closed for so long. He thought about winter not as an ending, but as a season that made room for new things. Ranger shifted closer, resting his head on Henry's boot. Henry smiled, slow and gentle. "Easy, boy," he whispered. "We did what we could." Snow fell softly around them, covering the town in a clean white hush, not erasing the past, just giving everyone a chance to start again. And somewhere, in a small kitchen on Maple Street, a young woman gathered her first deep breath of freedom, because a quiet man and his steady dog showed up when the world finally needed them to. Henry didn't call it a miracle. He just believed that sometimes God sends help quietly, through steady hands, open doors, and people who choose to show up.